Greetings everyone, it's Adam with the Rata Non Grata, doing another video here after a hiatus. I'm still super busy and I just don't have a lot of time to spend on a hobby channel that has no income out of it, but that's because I talk about games because I love games, and that's what it's all about. But wanted to do a rebuttal, friendly rebuttal. I'm not really being critical of this video of Let's Save the Atari Jaguar by Sega Lord X. I guess he does a lot of these videos where he goes back and presents in his view what would have saved or fixed something in gaming past, which I've done myself, and so that's why it's like I don't want to critique that. I don't want to say you can't do that, because again, I'm guilty of the same thing. I guess just in his view, the idea, it kind of gets into something that we would actually agree about as far as the real problem with Atari. This is something I've come to a realization as I've thought about these videos, or particularly when I was thinking about this one, and it's just that the semantics of fixing the system, changing the specs on the system, that's pretty much irrelevant. The real problem with Atari, and this can apply to other companies too, and this is why, in part, this interests me, just because it's like from a reality or realistic perspective, you can't go back in time and you can't change any of this. And so it's like, what are the lessons to learn from these things? Now, as somebody who operates his own small business, I'm sitting in my arcade right now. These things are interesting to me as to the mistakes that businesses have made in the past, particularly game businesses, because that's where I get all of my personal income from. And so I do work for a couple of other companies that are also in the games business, although mainly in the arcade business, not so much the game console side. But it's like, what mistakes did these companies within the gaming industry make that caused them to fail? And what I've learned is that over the years, through personal experience, as well as doing a lot of study on Atari's history, is that it's the management. When you have the wrong management in place, the wrong people in place, then everything falls apart. And it's not just the Tremels that you can criticize over that. It's like Nolan Bushnell made some serious mistakes when he was running Atari back between 72 through about 76 or so. And he basically got himself fired from Warner because he wanted to do some things that they didn't agree with. And like, he actually panicked around the time that the Atari 2600 was going to be released, where he was like, we should just cancel this and be done with it. Now, he probably would have made, I think he had said before, if I had just had a vacation, then I would have had a more level head to make decisions and stuff like that. But like, that was something that Warner shot him down on, and it's like, it's good that they did, because look at the success of the 20s. Like, really, it's the only true major success that the company ever had. But Warner themselves made a lot of bad decisions, and that's what essentially helped cause. It was a litany of bad decisions that helped cause the game crash in 1983. It wasn't E.T. Like, that was just one of many bad decisions, and of course, E.T. itself was really the Warner Communications head boss. I think his name was Steve Ross, if I'm recalling that correctly. He's the one that he wanted to have Spielberg on at Warner so badly after the success of E.T. that's why he committed $20 million to the E.T. license, even though it's like, this doesn't make any sense as a video game. They really should have finished the pinball machine, because it's like, maybe the pinball machine actually, I don't know that a pinball machine at that time, even then, would have made $20 million back, but it certainly would have, done better for the company than the game. But then you get to the Tramiels, and it's like a lot of the time when we're talking about the Atari days, and particularly the Atari Jaguar, it's like, yeah, the Tramiels made some bad decisions. And if you look up employee interviews, there's quite a few that are out there these days. I mean, most of these people are still around, and you can talk to them. Back when Jaguar Sector 2, which was a forum with a lot of Atari fans, mainly Atari Jaguar fans, existed, I was very active on there. I remember talking with some ex-Atari employees, such as BJ West, who is credited on games for both the Lynx and the Jaguar, but he's better known for his work on The Sims. You know, after Atari, he moved on to companies like EA and was an artist on that. But when you talk to people who actually worked there, it's pretty common that the issue was the management. And BJ West, as I recall, so there was a time where he was assigned to design a new mascot character for the Jaguar. I think I might have even done a video about that at one point. But he was the way he described it, I'd have to be paraphrasing here. It's been a long time since I've seen that message, but it was basically that the Tramiels thought that the reason why the Jaguar was struggling was not because it didn't have great games, is because they didn't have a mascot character like Mario or Sonic that people could relate to, and kids would be like, I really want that, and go for it. And he said something along the lines of, the Tramiels didn't understand what it was that made games fun. And so, again, that indicates a management problem where if you're running a game company, an entertainment company, you need to understand the basics of what it is that people are buying your products in the first place. And I think that's borne out by stuff like, Sega Lord X recommended that the Atari 7800 be canceled. And that they focus on, I guess, the Panther, and then by doing the Panther and then by completely changing the spec on the Jaguar, then that would have saved the Jaguar. Well, it's like, maybe, but realistically, it's like the 7800 actually was not a massive, it wasn't this giant flop. It performed a lot better than the Jaguar did. It sold more than the Lynx did. From what Kurt Vendel had revealed several years ago before he died, was that the 7800 sold 3.77 million units. That's not bad. I mean, sure, it's no NES. It's not even an Atari 2600, but it's the second best-selling Atari console ever released. And so it's like, why would you want to stop that? The reality is that the 7800 should have still been done, but what should have been done is the Tramiels should have hired somebody, or not just one person, but like a crew of people that really loved video games, that understood video games, that understood the consumer that they were trying to sell to, and just unleash their creativity. Like, that's one of the things when you read about what was happening at Atari around 1982, 83, 84, and there was a big brain drain from the company. In fact, and this gets back to Warner's poor management. When Warner came in, Atari was a very lax company as far as like the company culture was very relaxed, very chill. There's talk about the stuff with drugs and whatnot, but it's also like you didn't have to come into work with a suit on, and you didn't have this rigid stuff. It's just like, if you get your work done, great, then that's all we care about. But then Warner comes in, and now you start having suits coming in, but also things become a lot more rigid and organized. And yes, there is something to be said about efficiency and whatnot. But at the same time, Warner management started going back on a bunch of promises that had been made by management when the merger was happening, such as paying off royalties for the creators of the games. Like, that was a huge sticking point with a lot of employees. And the new management said, well, no, you guys read that wrong. That's not what we promised, even though it was. And so that's what made a lot of people leave Atari, and as well as the fact that Ray Cassard said, well, we're all into this together, nobody should get credit, because if you're going to credit the guy who created the game concept in the first place, well, then you also have to credit everybody on the assembly line who helped put the cartridge together. which was a little bit absurd. But again, that really pissed off a lot of people who were very smart, very creative, very talented, and they went off and formed their own companies. So this is why Activision exists. It's why Magic existed. It's what created the third-party efforts within the entire video game industry was because of bad management at Atari that pushed people out. But again, imagine if they had not lost David Crane and so many other people that went off and did their own thing. Like imagine if Pitfall and River Raid and all those games had been designed at Atari, then it might have helped keep things going on. And that would be the same thing with the 7800. It's like, yeah, if you had the time machine and went back to fix the problems at Atari, yes, you would want to start with the 7800, but it's not the system's fault. It was the management's fault. And if you had put a team in place that loved video games and were creative and can come up with original ideas, maybe come up with an idea or two for some good sequels. Like imagine if they had gone back and rehired Howard Scott Warshaw and say put him in charge of the 7800. He probably would have come up with some original ideas because he was working on stuff like that when he was fired. Like Saboteur. Or he might have also come up with a new Yar's Revenge or Yar's Revenge sequel on the 7800 that could have been cool to compete with what the NES, with what Nintendo was putting out on the NES. And if you had had a team like that in place from the get-go with the 7800 and you worked with third-party developers, like that's another story I've read about the Tramiels with the 7800 is that it's infamously known for having very little third-party support. Really, there was only like one or two, and one of those was Froggo Games, I think it was. And the story went that the CEO of Froggo Games was trying to get an audience with Sam Tramiel, I think it was, either Jack or Sam, one of the two. And like they made him wait outside his office for like hours or something along those lines, and they just did not work very well with third-party developers, and that was a problem that existed with the Lynx and as well as the Jaguar. I mean, maybe not so much as the Lynx, like they did get some okay third-party support there, or at least some good contractors, third-party contractors to help design the games. But it's like the 7800, as I pointed out in another Friendly Rebuttal video, it wasn't that weak, and it had a lot of potential to it. I mean, it could have held toe-to-toe with the NES, but again, that didn't matter if you didn't have the games for it. I pointed this out before, too. It's like this would also have been a management decision. Now, somebody decided Pole Position 2 is a great packing game for our new console. No, it wasn't. That was a stupid idea. It shouldn't have been something like that when you were getting other more exciting packing games on the competition. You know, it's like Nintendo. Yes, the very first packing game with the NES was not Super Mario Brothers. That came along a little bit later. But still, like I remember as a kid going to my friend's house and playing the NES for possibly the first time, and he had Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, and that was so cool. Two games on the same cartridge, and then both games are fun. Of course, played Super Mario Brothers more than we played Duck Hunt, but Duck Hunt was still cool because it's like, hey, you get a light gun, you get to shoot a gun at your TV and take out ducks, and that annoying dog keeps laughing at me. But but yeah, so it's like, could the 7800 been a major success? Could it have sold 30 million units had you been releasing games on it because you had a management in place that would have understood it? Yeah. And then that would have set up the Lynx to be more successful, and the same thing should have applied to the Lynx. Should have had, I mean, it started off with a good batch of games that Epix had created, you know, Electro Cop and Blue Lightning, and can't remember if Zarlar Mercenary was a part of that. But either way, there was a lot of good games that came out for the Lynx at first. And, you know, when it came to power, that's a perfect example of where power doesn't always mean much. It means nothing if you can't design games that are compelling and make people want to buy your system. Because the Lynx was, you know, light years ahead of the Game Boy. Yet the Game Boy completely crushed the Lynx. I think the Lynx sold something like 2 million units. I can't remember off the top of my head how many millions of, tens of millions of units that the Game Boy sold, even though it wasn't even in color, but it had great games. It was being run by a management that understood gamers, understood what they wanted, and gave them those things. And so it's like, again, all this stuff that you could get into as far as, should the Jaguar have done this or that for its hardware. It's like, well, none of that mattered, because like if you had smart management in place prior to that, or let's say they had bad management with the 7800 ST, the Lynx, but let's say they hired a good gaming boss, so to speak, for the Jaguar. And so that they can make wise, compelling decisions to put out great games on the Jaguar. And so instead of, say, Trevor McFur as one of the pack-ins or one of the very first games, that you would have had something else more compelling. Like there was that Defender 3 game, which I've played before. I can't remember what it was called because it wasn't called Defender 3. It came out in 1991 in arcades, and it was pretty cool. But something like that would have been more compelling than, say, like Trevor McFur. But also, like, if it had come out with several games, say, like the 7800 came out with 11 games. So let's say, what if the Jaguar had come out with 12 games on launch? And these were great games. Say they had a Street Fighter 2 port or a Mortal Kombat port, and done some original games, and also had an RPG and things like that. That would have created momentum so that more people would have been interested in buying the Jaguar. Instead, they did a very limited release, only had 2 or 3 games available for it. Sure, Cybermorph did get some positive reviews when it first came out, because in 1993 that was way ahead of what was available on other consoles. But it also wasn't the best game either. It was kind of dull to keep collecting pods after one planet and another. I mean, sure, it was cool to kind of explore around those worlds, but it still wasn't the most compelling thing ever. It wasn't as action-packed as, say, like Star Fox, which is what a lot of people compared it to. But either way, if you had that in place, and then you also had policies in place that would have been more developer-friendly, because this is another theme that plays throughout the Jaguar's development history. There's been a guy, I apologize, I can't remember his name, on Atari Age. Lost Dragon, I think, was his avatar name, but he's done many interviews with Jaguar developers, and a pretty consistent theme throughout that is just Atari had lousy support, even for their first party developers, and sometimes the code that they would be giving over to developers didn't work. I think I can't remember which company it was, but like the very first the code to boot the machine up didn't work. And so like the developer had to spend a week wasting time on this, and they figured out their own solution to get just the machine to boot, and things like that. And of course, it being a complicated machine, that didn't help. But it's like if Atari had a lot of really good developer support and got their documentation all in a row and was very helpful. Like I heard they bent over backwards for id Software, which made sense. But it's like, imagine if they had bent over backwards for every single developer that they got on board, and that they had gained a reputation for being developer-friendly as opposed to being a pain in the neck to work with. That would have made a difference. Because, again, especially back in those days, yes, graphics were important, but at the end of the day, it was still more about what cool games did you have? What experiences would you get from this console that you couldn't get on another console? To some degree, arcade ports were still important too, and the Jaguar had a couple of those, like Raiden and such, but it just didn't have a lot of the heavy hitters. Like, everybody I remember talking about Mortal Kombat coming out on the Genesis and the SNES, or Street Fighter 2 and things of that nature. But the Jaguar didn't have those heavy hitters until it had a few later on, like NBA Jam was a fantastic port and such, but it's like you need all of those things to be working, and you need a good management that really knows what they're doing. there. And so it's like, yes, would it have made more sense for the Jaguar to have come with more powerful hardware? Yeah, I've made that argument as well. Oh yeah, and here this is where I'm guessing I didn't watch the full video, I admit, sorry, but yeah, I guess he was making the case that yeah, it also should have had stuff like Street Fighter 2. But again, I think that's really what is the most important thing whenever you're talking about Atari. Is it's like looking at what sort of screw ups did the management make, and then applying it to daily life now, especially if you're in business, um, you should have good, coherent decision making going on. You should have a good company culture, one that understands games and also hires the right people to bring them in. So it's like Nintendo would not be what it is without Shigeru Miyamoto or Itoru. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name now. He used to be Satoru Iwatani, I think it was, or Sega. What would have Sega been without Yu Suzuki? Wouldn't have been the same company at all. And so that's the sort of people, creative talent that Atari really needed. But again, that came back to management. You know, they didn't hire the people that had that sort of thing. And that, I'm not trying to knock those that did work there, because again, from what I've heard, management was such at Atari that it was very difficult to work with, and so that might have stifled some creativity as well, or just they had too many things going on and so couldn't focus on one thing. And that's something that I've seen with companies that I've worked for before. There's one company, I won't say who they are exactly, that I've worked for before, where the management was chaotic and it made things very, very difficult to get ahead. Sometimes the boss would appear and be all over us and almost micromanaging us, and then suddenly he would disappear for like 2 months. And then it was like, well, okay, well, I'm doing everything I can here, but occasionally I still need guidance on stuff. There was another company that I worked for where it was just like they would make a decision, and then a month later it was almost like that decision had never been made, and the decision makers couldn't remember that they said that, and they're talking like completely new thing, and it was almost like management through ADHD. And so it was very frustrating to be able to get certain things done in those situations, and very chaotic. If a game company is chaotic, and you're not getting clear, concise direction on what it is that you need to be doing for your part of work, then things can fall apart. And I think that's exactly what had happened with Atari. Now, if we jump to Atari right now, it really seems to me that, of course, I can't speak to this exactly since I'm not working at Atari. Now, I am working for somebody right now who is licensing stuff out with Atari and working with them. But at least from what I've been able to experience, and I've actually had to talk with some people at Atari to get some things done, it's been a fine process. It hasn't been frustrating. I've known some people who did do development work for Atari roughly 10 years ago, and they said it was a very frustrating experience. And so the management changes that have taken place there are certainly positive ones, and I think that's being reflected in how Atari's become a much more successful company in recent times, enough that they're able to keep buying up all this IP from different older companies. And then of course, had management been more in tune with what the gamers wanted, perhaps they would have, they might not have done this infomercial thing. They might not have designed the game controller to be like that was. They might have designed something that was better for gamers. So that's the spiel. For me, that's my rebuttal, is that it really all was, and I did have a video about this too, that like the marketing for the Jaguar should have been different. Instead of focusing on 64 bits, they shouldn't have said that at all. It should have just been focused on, here's our games, this is what's cool about them. It's like, sure, you could do some tech stuff, but it's like show, don't tell is really what you should have been doing there. That game that was on, that motorcycle game, that was trash. That was one of the worst games on the Jag. Um, but yeah, it's like you focus on your stars. You know, Super Burnout, Wolf 3D, Doom, Tempest 2000, stuff like Alien versus Predator. That sort of stuff was what was most compelling about the Jaguar. But it needed more than that to really stand out. And so, yeah. That's my friendly rebuttal. Again, I don't think we're completely off base with each other here, that we're in agreement on some things. Like I said, I should have done more to watch through this full video before coming up with a full rebuttal. But it's just like, I know that he was talking a lot about the specs and stuff should have been completely changed and should have canceled consoles. And again, I just don't think that would have made any difference because of the policies in place at Atari. But do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Do you think I'm totally wrong? And whatnot? Let me know in the comments below, and we'll catch you on the next video, whenever that is. Hopefully it's more stuff about the Lynx, because happy anniversary, 36th anniversary to the Atari Lynx, which came out 36 years ago this month, and I love the Lynx, but yeah, this has been more Jaguar stuff, and this is a much longer video than I thought it was going to be. So anyways, we'll catch you on the next one.